A first-class ticket should guarantee you premium service, not premium prejudice. For Jordan and Jayla Davis, two brilliant tech entrepreneurs, their flight to London was meant to be a celebration. But on Apex Air Flight 74, they were about to meet Susan Reynolds, a veteran flight attendant who believed she was the sole arbiter of who belonged in her cabin. She would ignore them, belittle them, and refuse them even a glass of water. What she didn't know was that the twins held more power in their smartphones than she held in her entire 20-year career. A single quiet phone call made from 35,000 feet would not only end her career in minutes, but would set in motion a devastating chain of events, proving that karma doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it owns the entire building. The scent of success was a familiar one to Jordan and Jayla Davis. At 26, the identical twins had already cultivated it, bottled it, and sold it for a 9-figure sum. Their company, Nexus Innovations, had developed a revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform that was now the silent, beating heart of half the Fortune 500 companies' supply chains. They were young, they were brilliant, and they were black. In the sterile glass and chrome world of Silicon Valley, this trifecta often made them anomalies, unicorns in a field of stallions. But they wore their success not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of two people who had built an empire from a dorm room with nothing but a shared laptop and an intellect that burned twice as bright. Their journey to London was the culmination of a grueling 18-month negotiation. They had just sealed a landmark deal with a European conglomerate, a deal that would make them not just wealthy, but titans. This trip was their victory lap, and they were taking it in style. First class on Apex Air, the airline that prided itself on redefining luxury in the skies. The first-class lounge at JFK was an oasis of hushed tones and clinking champagne flutes. Jordan, ever the analyst, was reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jayla, the visionary and the face of the company, was on a call, her voice a smooth, persuasive melody as she charmed a potential investor. They were a perfect symphony of ambition and execution. When their flight was called, they gathered their things and made their way down the jet bridge. Stepping onto the aircraft was like entering a private club. The lighting was soft, the seats were individual pods of cream leather and polished burwood, and the air hummed with a quiet exclusivity. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson." A flight attendant greeted a man in front of them, her smile wide and genuine. "Can I get you started with some champagne or sparkling water?" The twins stepped forward, presenting their boarding passes. The flight attendant who took them was a woman in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. Her name tag read Susan Reynolds, and below it, head purser. She had the crisp, practiced look of someone who'd been doing this job for a very long time. She glanced at their tickets, then at their faces, and then back at the tickets. The briefest flicker of something, confusion, annoyance, crossed her features before being replaced by a mask of professional neutrality. The warmth she had offered the previous passenger had vanished. "2A and 2B, she stated, her tone flat. She gestured vaguely to their left. Down there. There was no welcome aboard, no offer of a pre-departure beverage, just a curt dismissal. Jayla and Jordan exchanged a glance. It was a look they had perfected over a lifetime, a silent conversation that could convey paragraphs of meaning. This one said, "Did you catch that?" And "Yes, let's wait and see." They settled into their spacious pods. The seats were magnificent, the legroom was practically infinite, and a complimentary amenity kit from a high-end French brand sat waiting for them. By all accounts, it was paradise, but a chill had already settled in the air, a subtle dissonance in the symphony of luxury. Susan Reynolds moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary command. She laughed with the man in 1A, a silver-haired executive named Mr. Peterson. She fussed over the woman in 3B, ensuring her cashmere throw was perfectly placed. She took drink orders, hung jackets, and offered newspapers, her voice a cascade of politeness. But as she passed row 2, she developed a peculiar form of selective blindness. She would look right through them. Her eyes would scan the cabin, her gaze gliding over the two black faces in 2A and 2B, as if they were part of the upholstery. Jordan, ever the pragmatist, tried to catch her eye. He raised a hand slightly, a polite smile on his face. Susan was 2 feet away, talking to the passenger across the aisle. She saw him. He knew she saw him. The corner of her eye twitched. She turned her back deliberately and walked toward the galley. "Okay," Jordan murmured to his sister, his smile fading. "So it's not just us." "It never is," Jayla replied, her voice soft but edged with steel. Her phone buzzed, another congratulatory text on the deal. She ignored it. A new, more pressing matter was at hand. They had paid thousands of dollars for these tickets. They had earned their place in this cabin, in this world, and they would not be made to feel invisible. The plane had not even left the ground, but the battle lines had already been drawn. The jet engine spooled up with a deep, resonant hum, and the Boeing 777 began its powerful pushback from the gate. The safety video played on the high-definition screens, a slick production featuring smiling, diverse faces, enjoying the unparalleled service of Apex Air. Jordan watched it with a grim irony. The video promised a world of attentiveness and care that was, at that very moment, being pointedly denied to him and his sister. Once they were airborne and the seatbelt sign pinged off, the first-class service was supposed to commence in earnest. Susan and another flight attendant emerged from the galley. Susan took the port side of the aisle where the twins were seated. The other, a younger woman named Chloe, took the starboard side. The ritual began. Hot towels were distributed with silver tongs. Susan started at the front. She presented a towel to the man in 1A with a flourish. "Mr. Peterson, for you." She moved to the next row, her body physically angled away from Jordan and Jayla. She leaned across the aisle to serve the passenger in 2D, then continued down to row 3, her back squarely to them. No towels for 2A and 2B. It was so blatant, so audacious, that it was almost comical. Jordan let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Are we in a cloaking device?" Jayla wasn't laughing. Her gaze was fixed on Susan's back, her expression a mask of cold fury. She had faced down cutthroat venture capitalists, dismissive engineers who doubted her coding skills, and boards of directors who saw her youth and gender before her genius. A flight attendant was not going to intimidate her. Next came the drink orders. Again, Susan started at the front. "Mr. Peterson, can I get you that Macallan 18 you enjoy?" He was clearly a regular. "You know me too well, Susan." She moved down the cabin, taking orders, her notepad in hand. When she reached their row, she paused. For a moment, they thought she would finally acknowledge them. Instead, she leaned over Jordan's seat, so close he could smell her cloying perfume, to speak to the woman in row 3. "Mrs. Albright, another glass of Sauvignon Blanc for you?" It was a masterclass in passive aggression. She was making it clear that this was not an oversight. It was a choice. Jordan had had enough. As Susan turned to walk back to the galley, he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority that had commanded boardrooms. "Excuse me, Miss Reynolds." Susan stopped. She turned around slowly, her face a carefully constructed blank. "Yes?" "My sister and I would like to order a drink," Jordan said, his tone even. "We seem to have been missed." Susan looked at him, then at Jayla. She held her notepad but didn't raise her pen. "I'll be back with the meal service shortly. You can order then." She turned and walked away before he could respond. Every head that had been paying attention in the small, intimate cabin swiveled to look at the twins. There were looks of sympathy, of awkwardness. Mr. Peterson from 1A caught Jordan's eye and gave a slight, apologetic shrug, as if to say, "I see it. It's not right." 10 minutes passed. Drinks were delivered to everyone else. The clinking of ice in glasses, the pop of a champagne cork, sounds of luxury that now felt like taunts. Jordan and Jayla sat in a deliberate drought, their table trays bare. Jayla finally broke the silence. This is a tactic. It's designed to make us feel unwelcome, to make us question whether we belong here. If we get angry, we become the angry black people. We fulfill the stereotype she already has in her head. We lose. So we don't get angry, Jordan said, understanding her completely. We get strategic, we document. He discreetly took out his phone. He didn't start recording video. That could be seen as aggressive. Instead, he opened a notes app and began typing, his fingers flying across the screen. 10:42 p.m. EST Flight 74 takes off. 11:05 p.m. EST Hot Towel Service. All passengers in F served except 2A and 2B. 11:15 p.m. EST Drink orders taken. Purser Susan Reynolds deliberately skips 2A and 2B. 11:18 p.m. EST. Directly requested service from Miss Reynolds. Request was dismissed. She stated we must wait for meal service. 11:25 p.m. EST. All other passengers have received their beverages. Each entry was a piece of data, a cold, hard fact in a situation thick with unspoken prejudice. They were tech entrepreneurs, and data was their weapon of choice. While Susan Reynolds was playing a petty game of power based on race, the Davis twins were building a case, bite by bite. The flight was long, and they were patient. They would let her build her own cage. The charade continued with the distribution of the menus. The leather-bound menus were presented to each passenger with a personalized greeting, to everyone except Jordan and Jayla. Theirs were placed silently on their side tables while they were looking away, as if dropped by a phantom. When it came time to take the meal orders, Susan's strategy shifted from neglect to direct confrontation. She approached their row, her pen finally poised over her notepad, her expression one of extreme reluctance, as if she were being forced to perform a deeply unpleasant task. "Your choices?" she asked, her voice devoid of any warmth. She didn't make eye contact, instead staring at a point somewhere over Jordan's shoulder. "I'll have the pan-seared halibut," Jayla said, her tone perfectly level. "And I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare," Jordan added. Susan scribbled on her pad. "And for your drinks?" she asked, the question laced with a saccharine condescension that suggested they should be grateful she was even asking. "I'll have a sparkling water with lime," Jayla said. "I'll have the same," said Jordan. They kept it simple, professional. They would give her no ammunition, no excuse to paint them as difficult. Susan's lips curled into a barely perceptible smirk. "Of course," she said, before moving on. The meal service was a study in subtle sabotage. When the other passengers' appetizers arrived on pristine white tablecloths, theirs did not. When they finally did arrive, after everyone else was finished, they were placed with a quiet thud, no "enjoy your meal" offered. The main courses came. Mr. Peterson's halibut was presented with a flourish. "The dill sauce is particularly wonderful tonight, sir." Mrs. Albright's chicken was described as perfectly tender. Jayla's halibut was set down before her. It was slightly overcooked, the edges dry. Jordan's filet mignon, which he had ordered medium rare, was cooked to a solid uniform gray. It was well done, practically leather. It was not a mistake a first-class kitchen on a flagship airline made. It was a message. Jordan calmly picked up his knife and fork and cut into the steak, revealing the overcooked interior. He didn't sigh. He didn't complain. He simply placed his utensils down and waited. He waited for 15 minutes. Susan passed their row 4 times, clearing other people's plates, refilling wine glasses, studiously ignoring Jordan's untouched plate. The disrespect was so profound, so performative, that it created an awkward silence in the surrounding seats. People knew. They saw. But the bystander effect is a powerful force, especially in the enclosed fuselage of an airplane. Finally, Jayla had reached her limit. Her patience, a deep and usually unshakable reservoir, had run dry. She pressed the call button. A blue light illuminated above their seat. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Susan was visible at the front of the cabin, chatting with the other flight attendant, Chloe. She could see the light. She was ignoring it. Jayla pressed it again and again. Finally, with a theatrical sigh, Susan sauntered over. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her arms crossed. The pretense of service was completely gone. "Yes, there is," Jayla said, her voice dangerously quiet. "My brother's steak is completely overcooked. It's inedible. And we have been ignored, dismissed, and treated with utter contempt since the moment we stepped on this plane." The directness of the accusation hung in the air. The cabin went silent. Susan's face hardened, the plastic smile melting away to reveal something ugly underneath. "I am the head purser on this flight," she said, her voice low and menacing. "I've been with Apex for 20 years. I decide the pace of the service in my cabin. If you are unhappy with it, you can file a complaint when we land." "We are unhappy with it now," Jordan interjected, his voice firm. "We are first-class passengers who paid for a service we are not receiving. In fact, we are being subjected to what feels like targeted discrimination." The word discrimination was the spark. Susan's composure shattered. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice rising. "I am treating you exactly as you deserve. I don't know how you people managed to afford these tickets, whether you used some special discount or a program for—" She stopped herself, but the implication was clear, hanging poisonously in the air. "But you don't get to come in here and make demands and throw around accusations. This is a first-class cabin, not the back of the bus. Now eat your food or don't. I have actual paying customers to attend to." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Mr. Peterson in 1A physically recoiled. The woman in 3B put a hand to her mouth. It was no longer subtext. It was text. Bold, underlined, and unforgivable. Jayla Davis looked at Susan, her eyes like chips of obsidian. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were colder than the air outside the cockpit window. "Thank you, Susan," she said with chilling calmness. "You've told us everything we need to know." She pulled out her phone. Susan scoffed. "Oh, what are you going to do? Tweet about it? Go ahead. The company has a whole department for people like you." Jayla ignored her. She unlocked her phone, her thumb hovering over a single name in her favorites list. It was a name that never appeared on any public board of directors list, but wielded more power within Apex Air than the CEO himself. A name that was both a mentor and a major investor in Nexus Innovations. A man who had told them to call him, day or night, if they ever needed anything. She looked at Jordan. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Jayla pressed the call button on her screen. The plane's satellite Wi-Fi was excellent. The call went through. As Susan watched with a contemptuous sneer, Jayla Davis put the phone to her ear and said 2 words that would detonate Susan Reynolds' entire world. "Hi, Arthur." The name Arthur meant nothing to Susan Reynolds. In her mind, it was just a name, probably some mid-level manager the twins were hoping to impress or intimidate her with. Her sneer deepened. This was pathetic. But to the upper echelons of global finance and industry, the name Arthur, specifically Arthur Kensington, was akin to royalty. He was a titan, a kingmaker, a man whose personal wealth was a rounding error compared to the influence he wielded. He sat on the boards of a dozen corporations, owned controlling stakes in 3 more, and had a reputation for being fiercely loyal and utterly ruthless. One of those corporations was the holding company that owned a majority share of Apex Air. He wasn't just on the board. He had handpicked the CEO. Jayla's voice was a model of composure, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions swirling in the cabin. "Arthur, my apologies for calling at this hour. Jordan and I are on Apex Flight 74 to Heathrow. Yes, the deal is done, thank you. We're celebrating, or at least we were trying to." She paused, listening. Susan stood frozen, her arms still crossed, a smirk still playing on her lips, though a flicker of uncertainty had begun to creep into her eyes. Why was this Arthur person answering a call from a plane? "There's a situation on board, Arthur," Jayla continued, her voice factual, devoid of emotion. "With the head purser. Her name is Susan Reynolds." She spelled the last name out slowly and clearly. We've been subjected to a pattern of deliberate and discriminatory behavior since we boarded. It has now escalated to a direct verbal confrontation in which she made a number of deeply inappropriate remarks. She recounted the events with the precision of a lawyer presenting a case. The skipped greetings, the denied towels and drinks, the overcooked steak, the ignored call button, and finally the unforgivable words, "I don't know how you people manage to afford these tickets." As she spoke, Mr. Peterson from 1A, a man who happened to be a retired litigator, unbuckled his seatbelt. He walked quietly over to Jayla. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently. "My name is Thomas Peterson. I am in seat 1A. I have witnessed everything you are describing. If your contact needs a third-party corroboration, I would be more than happy to provide it. This is the most unprofessional and bigoted behavior I have ever seen on an aircraft." He handed her his business card. Jayla smiled at him, a genuine, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Arthur, you heard that? I have a witness, Thomas Peterson." She relayed his seat number. On the other end of the line, Arthur Kensington was not speaking. He was listening, and the silence on his end was more terrifying than any shouting could be. He had taken Jordan and Jayla under his wing when they were still in college. He saw in them a reflection of his own youthful hunger and brilliance. They were not just his prize investment, they were legacy. An attack on them was a direct attack on his judgment and, by extension, on him. Finally, Arthur spoke. His voice, when it came through the phone, was calm, but it was the calmness of a nuclear reactor reaching critical mass. Jayla put him on speakerphone, the volume just loud enough for Susan and those nearby to hear. "Jayla," Arthur's voice, crisp and powerful, filled the small space. "Put Miss Reynolds on the phone." Susan's face went pale. The blood drained from it so fast she looked ill. Who was this man? Jayla held the phone out to Susan. "He'd like to speak with you." Susan stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. She shook her head, speechless. "She is declining to speak," Jayla reported calmly. "It doesn't matter," Arthur's voice replied. "The captain of that flight is named Frank Miller, a good man. I'm calling him on the cockpit line right now. Do not move. This will be resolved in a matter of minutes." The line went dead. Minutes. Susan's mind was racing, trying to compute the impossible. A passenger calling the captain. In the middle of a transatlantic flight? It was unheard of. It was a breach of every protocol. It was impossible. But less than 2 minutes later, the curtain to the cockpit was pulled back, and Captain Frank Miller emerged. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a face that radiated authority. He was not smiling. His eyes scanned the cabin and landed on the scene at row 2. The twins, calm and composed. Susan, white as a sheet. And Mr. Peterson, standing as a silent witness. The captain's gaze settled on Susan. "Miss Reynolds, a word. In the galley. Now." His voice was a low command that tolerated no argument. Susan, looking utterly broken, turned and walked toward the galley on unsteady legs. Captain Miller followed her in, drawing the curtain closed. The passengers in the first-class cabin tried not to stare, but they couldn't help it. The hushed whispers were a torrent. Behind the curtain they couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. The captain's voice was a low, furious growl. Susan's was a high-pitched, pleading whine. 5 minutes later, Captain Miller emerged alone. He walked directly to Jordan and Jayla. He leaned down, his face a mask of profound apology. "Mr. Davis, Miss Davis, on behalf of Apex Air, and on a personal level, I am horrified by what has occurred on my aircraft. There are no excuses for the treatment you received. It is an embarrassment to this airline and to every uniformed crew member on this plane. Please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies." "Thank you, Captain," Jordan said graciously. "We appreciate that." "Miss Reynolds will be relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight," the captain continued. "She will be confined to the crew rest area and will be met by corporate security and HR upon our arrival in London. Her employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective immediately." The finality of the statement was stunning, Fired. Not suspended, not investigated. Fired. In midair. We have arranged for you to be compensated for the full value of your tickets, and we have credited each of your accounts with 1 million frequent flyer miles, the captain added. I have also instructed the crew to offer you anything you desire from our menu or bar. Chloe, our other first-class attendant, will be personally taking care of you for the rest of the flight. If there is anything else at all that I can do, please do not hesitate to ask. That won't be necessary, Captain, Jayla said. Your handling of the situation is more than sufficient. Thank you. The captain nodded, then addressed the entire cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the disruption. Please enjoy the remainder of your flight. He retreated to the cockpit. A moment later, the younger attendant, Chloe, emerged. She looked shaken but professional. She approached the twins, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apology. Mr. and Miss Davis, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I am so sorry. I didn't know what to do. Susan was very senior. It's not your fault, Chloe, Jordan said kindly. We'll just have that sparkling water with lime now, please. As Chloe rushed to get their drinks, Jordan and Jayla finally allowed themselves a moment. They looked at each other, the tension of the last 2 hours finally breaking. They didn't smile in victory. It wasn't a victory. It was a depressingly familiar battle they had been forced to fight once again. But it was a battle they had decisively won. Across the Atlantic, in the dark void of the sky, Susan Reynolds sat in a cramped crew bunk, her career of 20 years in ashes around her. She had picked a fight with the wrong passengers. She had mistaken their grace for weakness, their youth for powerlessness, and in doing so, she had flown straight into the eye of a hurricane named Arthur Kensington, and been utterly, irrevocably destroyed. The rest of the flight was a surreal experience. Chloe served the twins with a level of attentiveness that bordered on reverence. A perfectly cooked filet mignon, sizzling hot, appeared before Jordan. A delicate, flaky halibut was placed in front of Jayla. Champagne was offered and politely declined. They were treated not just as first-class passengers, but as visiting dignitaries. The other passengers in the cabin regarded them with a newfound respect, occasionally offering a nod or a small, supportive smile. They landed at Heathrow under a gray, drizzling sky. As promised, 2 stern-looking individuals in dark suits were waiting at the jet bridge. They boarded the plane before any passengers deplaned and headed straight for the crew rest area. They emerged a few minutes later, escorting a pale, red-eyed Susan Reynolds, who clutched her handbag to her chest like a shield. She kept her head down, refusing to look at the cabin she once ruled. She was no longer a head purser. She was just cargo being offloaded. For Jordan and Jayla, the incident could have ended there. They had received an apology, justice had been swift, and they had a business empire in Europe to expand. They checked into their suite at the Savoy, the memory of the flight already beginning to fade, just another unpleasant anecdote in a life filled with far more significant challenges. They were used to moving on, to focusing on the future, not the past. But the world had other plans. Mr. Peterson, the retired litigator from Seat 1A, was not the type to let such an injustice pass quietly. Upon landing, he drafted a detailed, scathing letter to the CEO of Apex Air, CCing several major news outlets and airline industry bloggers. He described the appalling and systematically racist behavior of purser Susan Reynolds and the quiet dignity and professionalism of the Davis twins. He named himself as a witness and offered to testify under oath to what he had seen. His letter, combined with whispers from other first-class passengers, created a firestorm. An industry blog picked up the story first. Apex Airhead purser fired mid-flight over racist incident. From there, it went viral. The story was irresistible, a clash of class, race, and power at 35,000 feet. The names were kept anonymous at first, 2 young black entrepreneurs and a veteran flight attendant. But in the age of the internet, anonymity is a fragile thing. Flight attendants who had worked with Susan Reynolds for years began talking, anonymously at first, to reporters. A pattern emerged. Susan was known for being difficult, for having preferences for certain types of passengers. There were stories of her being dismissive to non-native English speakers, rude to families with young children, and particularly cold to passengers of color who found themselves upgraded to the front cabin. She had been the subject of numerous internal complaints, but as a senior purser with a spotless 20-year operational record and a strong union representative, they were always dismissed as personality clashes. The story of Flight 74 was the final, undeniable proof. Apex Air's stock took a 5% dip. The company, desperate to control the narrative, issued a public statement. They confirmed an incident had occurred, and that an employee had been terminated for violating the company's strict anti-discrimination policies. They publicly apologized to the unnamed passengers and reiterated their commitment to diversity and inclusion. But the apology tour rang hollow. The story was too big now. A leaked passenger manifest eventually led reporters to Nexus Innovations and, inevitably, to Jordan and Jayla Davis. Hounded by the press, Jayla, as the company's CEO, agreed to a single exclusive interview with a respected journalist from the New York Times. She was magnificent. She didn't rage, she didn't recriminate. She spoke with eloquent precision about the insidious nature of invisible prejudice. She described the feeling of being made to feel like an intruder in a space you have earned the right to occupy. She framed the incident not as a personal grievance, but as a teachable moment for corporate America. "This was never about a glass of water or an overcooked steak," she said, her image broadcast across the world. "It was about dignity. My brother and I, and people who look like us, are tired of having to politely ask for the same dignity that is automatically afforded to others. The price of the ticket should be the only qualification required for service, not the color of your skin." The interview was a sensation. Jordan and Jayla Davis became reluctant symbols of grace under fire. Their company's profile soared. In a twist of market irony, the incident that began with a flight attendant questioning their finances ended up boosting their company's valuation by an estimated 10%. They had turned a vile act of prejudice into a masterstroke of public relations, simply by being themselves. Meanwhile, for Susan Reynolds, the freefall was just beginning. Fired and disgraced, she was now a pariah in the industry she had dedicated her life to. The airline union, faced with irrefutable evidence and public outcry, quietly withdrew its support. She was blacklisted. No other major airline would touch her. Her 20 years of service had been erased by 20 minutes of hate. She retreated to her modest suburban home, unplugged her phone, and drew the curtains. The whole world suddenly a hostile and unforgiving place. But the true karma, the hard, life-altering consequence of her actions, was still waiting in the wings, gathering its strength for a final, devastating blow. 6 months passed. The world, as it always does, moved on. The Apex Air scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by the next cycle of outrage and intrigue. Jordan and Jayla Davis were busier than ever, their European expansion a wild success. They rarely spoke of Flight 74. It was a scar that had healed, a reminder of a battle they had not sought but had won. For Susan Reynolds, however, time had not been a healer. It had been a slow-acting poison. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her mortgaged house in a quiet New Jersey suburb. Her severance package, once a comfortable cushion, was rapidly dwindling under the weight of bills and a lifestyle she could no longer afford. The friends she had made over 2 decades of layovers and shared crew bunks had fallen silent, distancing themselves from her toxicity. She was an outcast. In her isolation, a bitter, corrosive resentment took root. She wasn't a racist, she told herself. She was just traditional. She believed in standards, in a certain type of decorum. Those twins, with their casual confidence and their powerful unseen connections, had represented a changing world she didn't understand and didn't like. They hadn't earned their place, she reasoned. They had cheated somehow. They had played a card, the race card, the power card, and she had been the victim. Her narrative was a fortress of self-pity, protecting her from the devastating truth of her own actions. But self-pity couldn't pay the mortgage. faced with foreclosure, a lifetime of simmering ambition resurfaced. For years she had dreamed of leaving the airline industry and opening her own business, a quaint upscale cafe in her town's charming downtown district. She would call it the Daily Grind. It would be a place of order and elegance with artisanal coffees, gourmet pastries, and a clientele that she deemed appropriate. It was her chance to build a world in her own image, a world she could control. She poured the last of her savings into a detailed business plan. She scouted a location, a beautiful corner spot that had just become available. All she needed was a small business loan, a significant one, but one she was confident she could secure. Her plan was solid, her credit history, before the job loss, was impeccable, and her resolve was ironclad. This would be her redemption. She applied to several banks. The big national chains turned her down flat. A recently unemployed 50-year-old woman with no entrepreneurial experience was too high of a risk. But there was one firm, a newer, more agile investment bank that specialized in funding promising local ventures, that showed interest. They were known for looking past the numbers and investing in the person, the vision. The firm was called Kensington Davis Capital. The name gave her a brief pause. Davis was a common name. Kensington less so, but still it was probably a coincidence. Her mind, walled off in its fortress of denial, refused to make the connection. She saw it as a sign, a quirky twist of fate on her path to vindication. The initial screening process went surprisingly well. A junior loan officer was impressed by the passion and detail in her proposal. She passed the first 2 rounds. Finally, she was scheduled for the final meeting, the one where the final decision would be made by one of the firm's senior partners. On the day of the meeting, Susan dressed with meticulous care. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in its familiar severe bun. She was the picture of professionalism. As she walked into the sleek minimalist lobby of Kensington Davis Capital, she felt a surge of her old confidence. This was her turf, a world of quiet luxury and serious business. She was shown into a stunning corner office with a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. A large mahogany desk sat empty. "He'll be with you in a moment," the assistant said before closing the door. Susan sat down, her portfolio open on her lap, her speech rehearsed. She was ready. She was going to win them over. This was the first day of the rest of her life. The door opened. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked in. He moved with an easy, athletic grace. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. He looked familiar, but she couldn't immediately place him. He looked different here, in this context of power, this immaculate suit. He sat down behind the massive desk, the skyline of New York City framed behind him like a crown. He slid her portfolio to the center of the desk, placed his hands on it, and looked her directly in the eye. And in that moment, Susan Reynolds knew. The fortress of her denial was breached, its walls crumbling to dust. Her blood ran cold. The man sitting across from her, the man who held her entire future in his hands, was Jordan Davis. The silence in the office was a living entity. It was thick and heavy, woven from the scent of polished mahogany, old leather, and the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Susan Reynolds sat perfectly still in the plush visitor's chair, her hands clasped tightly over the leather portfolio in her lap. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, the Manhattan skyline spread out like a kingdom at her feet. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel a part of it. This office, this view, this palpable sense of power. It was an affirmation. It felt like a homecoming to the world of privilege she believed she was owed, a world she had been unjustly exiled from. She had spent the last 10 minutes rehearsing her opening lines, adjusting her narrative. She would be poised, confident, the victim of a terrible corporate misunderstanding who had channeled her resilience into a brilliant new venture. She was the protagonist of her own comeback story. The name on the door, Kensington Davis Capital, was a strange, nagging dissonance she had successfully compartmentalized. A coincidence. It had to be. The door opened with a quiet, expensive click. Susan straightened her spine, a practiced professional smile ready on her lips. A man walked in, and her smile faltered. He wasn't the older, silver-haired executive she had pictured. He was young, dressed in a charcoal suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to be a part of him. He moved with a silent, confident grace that instantly commanded the room. There was something intensely familiar about his face, the set of his jaw, the intelligence in his dark eyes. Her mind scrambled for a connection, a memory. A passenger, perhaps? A VIP from years ago? He walked around the massive desk without a word, the skyline framing him like a portrait of modern power. He sat down, the leather of his chair sighing softly. He did not offer to shake her hand. He simply rested his own hands on the gleaming surface of the desk and looked at her. He just looked, and in that long, silent moment, the carefully constructed walls of Susan Reynolds' reality dissolved. The context snapped into place with the force of a physical blow. The face, the name on the door, Davis, the flight, the quiet, dignified passenger from seat 2A, the man she had refused to serve a glass of water. A cold dread, slick and oily, washed over her. It started in her stomach and spread through her limbs, leaving them feeling heavy and useless. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, impossible to draw into her lungs. The confident businesswoman vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. This wasn't an office. It was an execution chamber. The man sitting across from her, the man who held her entire future in his hands, was Jordan Davis. He finally broke the silence, his voice the same calm, measured tone she remembered with sickening clarity. "Miss Reynolds, thank you for coming in." Susan could only manage a nod, a pathetic, jerky movement. Her voice had abandoned her. "I have your portfolio here," Jordan said, gesturing to the document on her lap, which now felt like a lead weight. "I've reviewed it, but before we discuss the financials, I'd like to understand your vision. Tell me about the daily grind. Tell me about the experience you want to create for your clientele." It was a test. She knew it was a test. He was giving her a rope. He wanted to see if she would hang herself with it. Her mind raced, desperate for the right answer. I want to create a space," she stammered, her voice a strained whisper. "An elegant space, quiet, for people who appreciate the finer things. Good coffee, a peaceful atmosphere, a certain standard of clientele." "A certain standard," Jordan repeated, his expression unreadable. "Tell me more about that. Who is your ideal customer, Miss Reynolds?" There it was, the question designed to expose her. She could feel the trap closing around her. She tried to evade it, to speak in the sterile language of marketing. "Young professionals," she said quickly. "Local business owners, people from the community who want a premium experience." "I see," Jordan said, leaning back slightly. "So it would be an inclusive space, welcoming to everyone in the community?" "Yes, of course, yes," she said, the words tumbling out too eagerly. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Jordan held her gaze. "Because the success of a service-based business, whether it's a cafe or a global airline, rests entirely on that principle, making every single customer feel seen, valued, and welcomed. Wouldn't you agree?" She could only nod again, her throat constricting. He gestured to her portfolio again. "You can put that on the desk." With trembling hands, she did as she was told, sliding the document across the vast expanse of polished wood. It felt like a surrender. Jordan opened it, though his eyes never left her face. "Let's talk about Flight 74. Susan flinched as if he had struck her. It was a misunderstanding," she whispered, the old, flimsy excuse sounding utterly pathetic in this room. "It was a very stressful flight. I wasn't myself." "Weren't you?" Jordan's voice was still quiet, but it now carried a sharp, surgical edge. "Let's examine that. You were not yourself when you greeted every passenger by name except for my sister and me. You were under stress when you provided hot towels and drinks to every single person in first class but us. Was it a misunderstanding when you deliberately served my steak, ordered medium rare, cooked until it was gray and tough. He paused, letting each question land with devastating precision. You see, Miss Reynolds, I don't think it was a misunderstanding at all. I think you were exactly yourself. You were a person in a position of authority who saw two people you believed did not belong in your space. And you used your limited power to try and put them back in what you perceived to be their place. It was a calculated, deliberate, and systematic campaign of disrespect. Tears began to well in Susan's eyes. They were tears of pure self-pity. You destroyed my life, she choked out. 20 years of service, my career, my pension, everything gone, over a stake. A flicker of something hard and cold entered Jordan's eyes. Do not disrespect my intelligence or your own by pretending this was about a stake. This was about you deciding, based on the color of our skin, that we were unworthy of the dignity you so easily afforded the white passenger sitting one row ahead of us. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. My sister and I built our company from nothing. We faced doors slammed in our faces, investors who told us people like you don't run tech empires. We have been underestimated, overlooked, and insulted in ways that would make your experience on Flight 74 seem like a pleasant afternoon. But not once did we ever allow that bitterness to compromise our character. We never treated anyone with the contempt you showed us, because our parents taught us that character is the one thing you build for yourself that no one can ever take away from you. But you can give it away. And you, Miss Reynolds, gave yours away for free. He turned back to face her, his expression resolute. Now let's talk business. Your financial projections are a work of fiction. Your market analysis is non-existent. Your business plan on its own merits is a failing proposition. Any responsible loan officer in this city would deny this application in a heartbeat. He walked back to the desk and placed his hands flat on its surface, leaning forward slightly. But let's imagine for a moment that it was perfect. Let's imagine it was the most brilliant business plan I had ever seen. The answer would still be no. He let that sink in. Kensington Davis Capital was founded by me, my sister Jayla, and our mentor, Arthur Kensington. We invest in innovation, in passion, and above all in people. The single most important line item on our balance sheet is the character of the founder. It is the core asset, and on that metric, your application is not just denied, it is offensive. He picked up her portfolio, holding it as if it were contaminated. You didn't just serve me a bad meal, Miss Reynolds. You revealed who you are. You showed us that you are incapable of treating people with basic human decency if they don't fit your narrow, prejudiced worldview. How would you treat a supplier you felt was beneath you? A young barista of color who worked for you? A customer who walked in wearing a hijab? Your behavior on that plane was a preview of how you would run your business, and this firm will not write a check to fund a monument to your bigotry. He dropped the portfolio on the desk with a soft final thud. We do not invest in racists, Miss Reynolds. We consider it the single worst investment we could possibly make. The word, racist, hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. It was the truth she had spent 6 months running from, and it had finally cornered her in this glass tower in the sky. All the fight went out of her. The tears stopped. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. Jordan walked to the door and opened it. His professional decorum was the final, most exquisite form of cruelty. There was no shouting, no revenge, just a calm, rational, business-based termination of her hopes and dreams, rooted in the undeniable truth of her own actions. The assistant will validate your parking, he said, his voice once again neutral. Thank you for your time. Numbly, Susan rose from the chair. Her legs felt like lead. She did not take the portfolio. She walked past him, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel the stares of the young, diverse staff in the open-plan office beyond, the very kind of people she would have deemed unworthy of her elegant space. The walk through that office was the longest, most shameful walk of her life. As the elevator doors closed, she finally looked up, catching her reflection in the polished steel. She saw a tired, defeated old woman, stripped of her pride, her career, and now her last, desperate hope. When she stepped out onto the bustling New York street, the world seemed impossibly bright and loud. The city was a vibrant tapestry of faces, all colors, all cultures, all striving, all living. It was the world as it was, not the carefully curated, sanitized version she craved. And for the first time, she understood with sickening clarity that she was the one who didn't belong. She hadn't been exiled. She had simply been left behind. And so Susan Reynolds' story serves as a chilling, powerful reminder that the world is smaller than we think, and the consequences of our actions have a way of finding us, often in the most unexpected and ironic ways. Her prejudice cost her more than a job. It cost her a future. For Jordan and Jayla Davis, their grace under pressure didn't just win them an apology. It solidified their legacy, proving that the best response to hate is not more hate, but overwhelming, undeniable success. This story shows us that character is the one currency that truly matters, and in the final accounting of our lives, it's the only investment that yields a real return. If this story of justice and hard karma resonated with you, if you believe that our actions should define us, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button to let us know you're with us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more true stories to share about consequences, justice, and the moments that changed lives forever. Thank you for listening.